There aren't many shows that can capture the same dark comedy Overlord provides, but there are a few that come close. Well, sort of. Like, sure, Slime and Shield Hero may have that overpowered MC with a similar scale of politics and war, but the main thing both lack when compared to Overlord is that maxed out luck stat which allows Ainz to continuously fail upward. You see, part of what makes Overlord so enjoyable is Ainz's ability to BS his newfound position in the best ways possible. It doesn't matter that he doesn't know how to be the leader his subordinates expect him to be, because whatever decision he makes always ends up making him seem that way. He becomes viewed as this absolute ruler whose plans span centuries into the future. And though that's definitely not what Ainz is always intending, it's more often than not the way that it turns out for him. So, if that aspect of winging it and coming out on top is what you're a fan of, then you'd be happy to know Eminence in Shadow takes that and kicks it into overdrive. Not to the point where the protagonist is so clueless that he's dumb, but instead in a way that's actually quite entertaining. It's that, alongside a couple of other things, that really makes Eminence in Shadow reminiscent of Overlord. Of course, it has its own individual thematic elements as well, but if I was to choose a show that felt closest to Overlord in terms of Ainz's interactions within Nazarick, then Eminence in Shadow would by far be the winner. Before I can explain exactly how so though, I should probably give you guys a quick synopsis. That and remind you of my newest merch release. If you didn't see it in my last video, then allow me to introduce you to the Armory, a high quality desk mat that takes inspiration from a lot of my favorite anime. Whether you use it as a mousepad or an accessory for your desk, it's honestly a solid anime themed purchase that's not just clothing. So if you want to support the channel and get something pretty cool in return, then you can get these now using the link in the description. Now, with Eminence of Shadow being an isekai, the whole premise is pretty similar to what we've seen from the others before it. Student gets hit by a truck, then wakes up in a new world with memories of his past life. What separates Kageno from the isekai protagonists before him though was that Kageno's past life was actually quite interesting. He was the type of guy who possessed these Chunibu desires to become a hero, so much so that he revolved his life around them. He would train himself in various forms of combat, then set out at night to practice it against real-life criminals, initially starting out with just common thugs and bikers, but eventually leading him to kidnappers and more dangerous people. This wasn't so he could bask in the glory of being this masked vigilante, but instead birthed out of a desire to become a being who could overcome anything, an entity so powerful and strong that not even a nuke would stop him. When faced with the limitations of being human though, Kageno became willing to do anything to overcome them, including accidentally jump in front of a truck in search of the magic which would allow him to do that. So, after reincarnating into a world where magic is actually possible, our protagonist finds himself capable of fulfilling the goal he's always dreamed of. He could finally become the hidden mastermind he's always wanted to be, the commander in the dark he refers to as the Eminence in Shadow. Now, where this series relates closest to Overlord is the organization Sid builds in order to become the Eminence in Shadow, a group he made up called Shadow Garden whose purpose is to fight against the supposedly fictitious cult of Diablos, both of which Sid imagined himself in order to get others to join him. The thing about this made-up story though is that the cult of Diablos isn't as fictional as he thought it to be. So far, Sid doesn't know it to be this group that actually exists, but to the rest of Shadow Garden they're the very enemy they're fighting against on a day-to-day basis. So, when these members of his group show up reporting on the movements of the cult they're facing, Sid believes it to be them just playing along with him, but in actuality they're really fighting against this evil organization whose reach spans across the continent. That's the core part that makes him clueless. This whole idea he made up to allow him to become this mastermind in the shadows is in reality a very dangerous group Shadow Garden is actively battling. Initially, the cult was just a scapegoat intended to pin accusations for every criminal they came across, but over time the whole thing spiraled into a massive war between two syndicates operating in the shadows. So, whenever Sid's subordinates come to him to hear the plans of his next operation, despite him being oblivious to the fact it's actually against the cult, the rest of the members see him as this brilliant tactician who's always 10 steps ahead of them. He inadvertently makes himself seem infallible just like how Ainz does. Where Sid likes to take that one step further though is that he always makes sure to insert himself at the finale. You see, whatever conflict it is and whoever it's up against, Sid will only reveal himself at the most impactful moment, thus allowing him to further improve his image as this all-powerful leader, as well as add notoriety to his Eminence in Shadow title. So, just like how it is in Overlord, despite Sid completely winging his position as the leader of this massive organization, everything he does always makes him seem superior. You'll get the same awe-inspired looks we saw in Overlord, all the way to the Sasuga lines praising his genius. That's about the extent to which these two series can be compared. Of course, there are also the over-the-top one-sided victories which accompany some gory fights, but the core connection relating these two shows together are the similarities between Nazarick and Shadow Garden. Where Eminence in Shadow strays away and unfortunately becomes less entertaining because of it, is the other half of the series involving Sid's daily life as a student. You see, part of what makes him the Eminence in Shadow is the mediocre life he strives to live during the day. By being this all-powerful figure in the shadows, it's absolutely necessary for him to be this unnoticeable side character in public, resulting in these over-the-top scenes in which Sid makes an absolute fool of himself. Now, that's not to say I don't like the occasional lighthearted comedy these scenes provide, but when compared to the dark, serious tones that come from the scenes with Shadow Garden, it's such a stark contrast it actually feels jarring sometimes. Like, I get it's necessary to build the plot and accentuate Sid's passion to fulfill the role he's given himself, but to me it kind of undermines the more heavy moments. That said, I will also say there are moments so badass that you'll completely forget about the ridiculous things Sid did earlier on in the episode. He honestly has no chill when it comes to flaunting his power. Yes, he does like to wait for the most impactful moment, but it's when that moment comes that he'll use the most spectacular spell that he can think of. Kind of like how when Ainz wanted to show the Empire what he was capable of. It's basically that, but Sid doing it all the time. Now, when it comes to the actual anime production itself, aside from the animation being far better than your average isekai, every OST has been an absolute banger. Like, I'm not even joking when I say some slap as hard as that chorus from Giorno's theme in JoJo. So, with the same composer who brought us all the OSTs from Re:Zero, it's rather expected to have soundtracks just as memorable. We also have an opening by OXT who did Overlord's theme songs for seasons 3 and 4, as well as an ending by the VAs of Shadow Garden which just so happens to include Inari Minase. Aside from all that though, the most intriguing thing for me was this series being the directional debut of Kazuya Nakanishi. Reason being that this is the same person responsible for some of my favorite action sequences. Specifically a few involving Re:Zero's Rem and Wilhelm, as well as the very iconic finale to Chivalry of a Failed Knight. The latter may not have been a fight that lasted very long, but the way it was animated to highlight the significance of its brevity was a spectacular feat I'm sure very few would be capable of. So for Nakanishi to finally be in charge of an anime of his own, well, let's just say I'm extremely excited to see what he can come up with. But yeah, that's pretty much my 2 cents on why you should watch Eminence in Shadow. If you like how Ainz acts when playing the leader of Nazarick, then I'm sure you'll love how Sid acts as the leader of Shadow Garden. His facade as a background character does get a bit excessive, but that's the core element that makes this show different. It builds the plot, develops new characters, and most importantly leads to the climax of Sid's meticulously planned interventions. So, if that sounds like a premise that you'd be interested in, then definitely give it a shot and let me know what you think about it. Personally, I've been really enjoying it. I wouldn't say it's anything groundbreaking, but it's definitely better than the typical low-effort isekai that we usually see. If you're watching it already though, then please do let me know what you think about it in the comments. Now, before I go, don't forget that you can get the Armory desk mats using the link in the description. If you want to support the channel and receive something pretty cool in exchange, then I definitely recommend getting one. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!